Welcome to Elizabeth's Chronicles. If you love true crime, consider subscribing. Jason Hagen dej-oudom and his wife Fukio married in July of 2000 in Franklin County, Columbus, Ohio. The family moved from Columbus, Ohio to Nevada in March of 2015. They moved into the 6100 block of West Lake Mead Boulevard in Las Vegas. The couple had 3 children, Annihilators Jason dej-oudom, age 9, Znajek JJ dej-oudom, age 14, and Annihilators dej-oudom, age 15. The youngest, known as AJ, attended Cully Elementary School. He was one of the school's top-performing students and enjoyed math class. Annihilators attended Escobedo Middle School. Her friends described her as amazing, gorgeous and nice. They said she always tried to make people happy. She lit up a room and was a beautiful soul, one friend said. Znajek attended Brinley Middle School. However, all children were pulled for homeschooling in recent months. Fukio dej-oudom, known by her co-workers as Gail, worked as an assistant manager at Sport Clips Haircuts, located at 5130 South Fort Apache Road. She was described as spunky, and a loving mother. She was known as someone who was always playing pranks on her co-workers and kept them laughing. On May 25, Gail filed for divorce. She had a motion for temporary custody of her 3 children. She went into hiding and quit her job to keep her husband from locating her. She texted her boss, "I cannot work, he'll know where I am. I have to quit now." Gail jotted down on record when she filed for a protection order, "Throughout the marriage, the children's lives as well as mine have been threatened," Fukio dej-oudom, age 35, wrote. "He said me not returning home is not an option, and if anything were to happen to the children, he hopes I can live with that." However, her motion for a protective order was not granted. On Wednesday, June 29 in 2016, Jason located his wife and chased her from the home she was staying. She ran through 2 parking lots. Gail was spotted waving her hands, and screaming desperately for help from passerbys. A family driving by, pulled over, and called 911. Gail jumped into their car. The family pulled out, but Jason was chasing them pointing a gun. The family had their 8-year-old son in the backseat, and feared if the man began shooting, that their child may be in danger. So they pulled over, into a parking lot. Jason opened the car door, and dragged Gail out of the car, and forced her into his car. Gail was seen hanging out of the car, yelling and waving her hands for help. She eventually escaped, and ran toward a Walgreens, near West Lake Mead and North Jones Boulevard. Jason ran after her. He caught up, and witnesses heard 4 gunshots. One struck Gail in the head. Bystanders rushed to her side to try to give first aid, but she was already deceased. Police were on the scene within minutes. They were advised that the suspect was an Asian male driving a black Mercedes-Benz with custom rims. About 30 minutes later, a relative called police advising them that Jason was at his apartment and threatening suicide. A SWAT team was dispatched to the home. They noticed the Mercedes-Benz in the driveway. They attempted to make contact with anyone inside the residence, but there was no response. After a few hours of no contact, they forced entry, and found Jason dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, and all 3 children were dead from gunshot wounds. Police were investigating the scene nearly all night at the Torrey Pines apartment complex, gathering evidence. The Clark County Family Court that denied the request for a protective order made a public statement that said, The request was denied because the allegations Mrs. dej-oudom were from years ago in Ohio. That there was no incidents of alleged threats or violence in Nevada. So they could not grant an order of protection. Marco Lopez, a neighbor, said he saw the wife frantically run from the complex around 7 p.m., she was screaming for help, and attempting to get into people's cars, but Lopez said he was nervous, and unsure of what to do. He said he didn't think dej-oudom was going to chase her at first, but after a few moments he went after her. Next door neighbor, Lori Colongello said, "I'm very saddened to think somebody would do that to his wife and children, and he found no other way to deal with his problem." She went on to say she knew the family, and spoke to them often. "I think if someone would have intervened before he executed those children, because after that woman got hurt there was still time to save those babies," said Colongello. She says she prays for the murdered children. "They were truly innocent and they had no place in this. They did not deserve to die for the wickedness of their dad," said Colongello. "We lost one of our friends, one of our family members," said co-worker Alison Wall. "She was one of the best people you would have ever met. Her little babies were her life," said Wall. "She did everything for those kids and they knew it." Co-workers said that she had received multiple threats from her husband through text messages recently, and she was in fear of her life. "It's going to be hard not working with her anymore," said Christina Kinsel. "She was doing all the right things. People always say why don't they leave. She did leave, and it was out of her control," said Kinsel. "It's really hard to understand how this could happen, how somebody could do that to children," Police Lieutenant Dan McGrath said. Investigators say Jason had a criminal past. His record shows he was convicted of felony theft and domestic violence in Ohio back in 2006. The community held a vigil in July to remember the mother and her 3 children. It was held outside the Walgreens where Fukio dej-oudom was gunned down. The youngest child, AJ's former teacher, organized the vigil. Candles were lit and balloons were released as they said goodbye to the family. Daniel Patrick Lynham was born on February 1 in 1951. His parents were Thomas and Frances Lynham. He was married to Linda Lynham. Her parents were Jack and Willie Mae Hall. All 3 families lived within 3 miles of each other. Daniel and Linda had 2 small children. Shina Lynham, 2 years old, and Jason Lynham, 5 weeks old. The couple rented a home in Federal Way, about 10 miles north of Tacoma, in a cul-de-sac near Mirror Lake, a very quiet neighborhood, surrounded by tall Douglas fir trees. Linda Lynham worked in radiology at Tacoma General Hospital. Patrick was a house painter but rarely did steady work. Daniel was known to keep to himself, and had a history of mental illness. He had problems keeping a steady job. Daniel and Linda went to church and were described as born-again Christians who attended service regularly. On July 11 in 1987, Daniel shot his wife and 2 children in the head while they were sitting on the couch in the living room. He then drove to his parents' home, just a couple of miles away, in North Tacoma and shot them both, also in the head. He then traveled to Lynham's parents' home, about 3 miles away, on a bluff overlooking Tacoma's Commencement Bay. He shot them both in the head. Afterwards, Daniel called his brother, and told him he had killed some people, and was going to hurt himself. His brother called police. Around the same time, a neighbor called police to do a welfare check on the Lynham home in Federal Way. Rock music has been playing loudly all night long Friday night, and was still on Saturday morning. About 8 p.m. police arrived at the home. Daniel told them, "Get out of here, I don't want to have to hurt you." He then went back inside, and a few minutes later they heard a gunshot. Daniel had killed himself. All victims were shot in the head with a .38 caliber handgun. It's a pretty shocking, grisly event, said Police Sergeant Stephen Smith. "We have 7 people who are deceased, apparently at the hands of one individual who took his own life. A thorough investigation shows Daniel had been drinking tequila and smoking marijuana right before the murders." Lorraine Reha was a family friend to the Lynham family for nearly 40 years. She said that Daniel Lynham was under treatment for mental illness, but that his mother, Frances, never showed any fear that she may be in danger. Neighbor Betty Norman said the family moved into the neighborhood only about 3 months ago, and nobody knew them. She said nobody heard any gunshots prior to police arriving. Jack Hall's sister, Perdue, Linda's aunt, said that Linda once arranged to have her husband committed to a mental hospital. She said, "My mind is just blank at this moment. I'm just trying to figure out what happened. I can't understand what made him do it." A neighbor, Craig Ralston, described that on the day of the murders, he overheard arguing coming from the residence. But since Patrick was odd, he was unsure if it was anything to be concerned about. The arguing was loud, but then it completely stopped suddenly. Dr. Michael Soronan, a friend and employer, who worked with Linda, said, "Linda was never without new photographs of family or stories to tell. She had many stories to tell, as any young loving mother would have." Soronan met Linda Lynham when he was teaching at the Tacoma Community College in 1977, where she attended. 2 years later, she came to work for him and his partners at the Tacoma Radiation Center. He went on to say, "Linda was full of life, her children were full of life, and her parents were full of life and love." Chris Taylor, a Tacoma Police Department spokesperson, said, "At this time, and probably never will we know the motive." King County Police spokesman Dick Larson said, "We may never know what triggered this whole episode." He did not leave any notes. "And since he is not available to answer our questions, I don't know that we'll ever know. It's frustrating, a terrible tragedy. To see people's lives wasted like that is a real tragedy. To see those babies have their lives taken from them is pretty sad," he said. Linda's father, Jack Hall's casket had a folded U.S. flag in front. He served in the United States Coast Guard during World War II. Ralston put flowers on the doorstep of the Lynham home, said Patrick was a loner, who stayed home while his wife worked. Reverend Stanley Felgar of Grace Baptist Church in Tacoma spoke at the services. He described Jack Hall as a kind man. "This is a tragedy that hit all of us, myself as well as the church," Felgar said after the service. "There was a gentleness and love in this family, and that they wanted the same of others. I see this taking of life in this way as a tragedy, and I hope there'll be those in our community, and in our church who will pick up, and take over in Christian love, and service where Jack and Willie May left off," said Felgar. Over 200 family and friends gathered to pay their last respects at the family's funeral on Saturday, July 18 in 1987. Flowers and brown teddy bears topped the closed caskets. Jason Hagen, dej-oudom, was a disturbed man who abused his wife. The system failed this mother and her children. A protective order should have been granted. Not only did the system fail her, but many turned a blind eye to her as she begged for help. Someone should have picked her up and drove her to the police station. This lady was failed in many ways. Shame on everyone who drove by and ignored this lady's pleas. Daniel Patrick Lynham was a very mentally ill man. He should have been institutionalized. He was a ticking time bomb. Unfortunately, his wife and 2 beautiful children became victims. May they rest in peace. That concludes this episode. Keep your eye out for the next volume, coming soon. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.